Sven, let's turn to you. The world often looks at Scandinavia and believes that government, business and the consumer all exist in happy union, all three happy children in the bed together. Is this true? When it comes to EVs, is it true?
We are not right there now, but on EVs we have done a lot. On oil exploration, we still want to continue and exploit more oil than the world can have to reach goals. But take it from the individual perspective. As we have so many new EVs in Norway now, I can say that I don't know any Norwegian that would like to buy a traditional car when they have used an EV car as their first car. So there is no doubt about that. The individuals, they would like to go for EVs if they are not too expensive and whatsoever. So if we had time, we could have left all these complex questions to the market, because then we would have these EVs there not in maybe 10 years, but in 20 or 30 years. But currently, the global temperature is increasing by 0.2 centigrades per decade. So we don't have that time. And that means that, and if you then go to the business, they will produce more if they have the incentives, but those incentives are not there. So unfortunately, there is a need for the politicians to make the market function, and we are not there yet. So, but I think that will be needed. That will be needed in the international climate negotiations and so forth. And the other panelists here that talked about funding and so forth, it is of course clear that we that live in the rich world have to help this transition to go fast in the developing world, and I talked about even leapfrogging. But if you go to another part of the world that will, in the end of the century, be 3 billion people or more, Africa, I think they are in a even more challenging situation than India today, that I think have the resources to deal with this issue in a much better way, and also make that part of their economic development positive.
Well, I mean, it's an awesome achievement, what's happened in Norway. I wish there were more Norwegians on my work run this morning. Maybe you should come over here and start driving around. But there is one thing. We've heard from everybody that this is literally a burning platform. Aren't we faffing around here a bit, Sven? Right? You talk about provocations, we talk about nudging people, etc. Don't you think there should just be a blanket insistence that from government that people drive?
As I said initially, is that the reason why we have so many EVs in Norway is not that we are more environmentally friendly, but that in this case we had a lot of incentives. We could park for free, we could take the taxi lane, there was less tax and so forth, and that was sufficient so that it was a good economic choice to buy an EV. But if you now go back to the politicians in Norway and ask, because it has had a cost, if you go back to them now and think that they did the wrong thing 10 years ago and they boosted this, everybody will say that we did the right thing. So that is something that maybe other countries can learn from.
Fair enough. Just a quick announcement. For those waiting, the Honourable Minister Nitin Gadkari, he's slightly delayed, but he is on his way. So if you can just put up with us for a little while longer in this fascinating panel. Casper, let's turn to you. Why do people, and I know we've talked very much about cars and vehicles, we haven't talked about aviation, maybe we'll have a bit more time on that. But when it comes down to the consumer purchases, there are those, let's say, in places like Norway where the purchase might be a lot to do with motherhood and apple pie, doing the right thing, a social conscience, all those things, right? For others, it's not that simple. And if life was that simple, we wouldn't, there'd be no sin in the world. But to cut to the chase, Casper, how do we get consumers to get more vavavoom out of this purchase? How do we put sex appeal into these EVs, right? How do we sell them in the way that Louis Vuitton sells handbags? Because at the moment you get the sense when I talk to consumers that it's not that an exciting purchase. It might be a morally right purchase. What's your view on all that?
I guess it depends on what you buy. If you buy a Tesla Model S Plaid, fastest production guy ever made, I mean, that's pretty appealing to some people. But I think fundamentally, you know, as you say, we're talking about incentives and incentivizing people to buy the cars. You know, the thing to think about, you know, and I mentioned it earlier, what we're seeing in terms of like EV sales and demand is there is no demand constraint. The constraint at the moment is the upstream, is the supply. And if governments actually think that incentivizing via financial methods or otherwise could get us there quicker, that's great. But the challenge is that the supply chain is not going to be there to supply the minerals or supply, you know, there's going to be some kind of component constraint. Now, we've seen how that plays out to some extent with the semiconductor shortage, which has meant that automakers more generally haven't been able to produce the cars they hoped. And I think, you know, that's not the only solution. There's many pieces of this whole supply chain that need to happen all together to be able to get to the targets that we're hoping for. Now that, you know, part of that is incentives, that definitely helps. And you as you know, we've been discussing on the panel, that's definitely helped in Norway and being a major part of it. But also you need solutions across the value chain. So attracting refining capacity, attracting cell manufacturers, attracting investments into raw materials and mines. There's many pieces to make this solution come together. So I don't know if it's a case of necessarily making it more appealing. I think, as I say, demand is pretty good. There's a lot of social conscious out there, as you say, in terms of doing the right thing and buying that more sustainable option. But you need, a huge amount of work across global governments, private industry, and consumers to get to where we want to be, which is, you know, of fundamentally reducing the impact of climate change as quickly as we can.
Okay.